let me say, a word in defense of reason in dialogue with faith.
Because faith is that proof. Faith unites us to that substance.
But reason, in order to realize its full potential, needs the horizons revealed by and truths contained in the faith. And not just any faith, but the Catholic faith.
There are two fundamental kinds of beliefs that make up Mormonism. The Catholic Church does not make a statement about who's a Christian and who's not. Just like the Catholic Church doesn't decide who's going to heaven and who isn't. My students ask me, does the Catholic Church believe that anybody who isn't a baptized Catholic is going to hell? Some students even ask me about limbo, which was one of those gossip things that was never actually a doctrine, just gossip. But I say the Catholic Church doesn't decide who goes where in the afterlife. Who makes that call? Who makes that? You've made the decision, but who makes the final placement? God. Nobody else. But the Catholic Church does decide in conversion who has a valid Christian baptism and who doesn't. I have a colleague at the university, teaches economics. He's strong in the parish. He converted the same time I did, but with a different process, though he went through the kind of adult study classes with me. He and his wife just had a baby and baptized it at the end of December. Beautiful. She teaches economics too. She's a devout Catholic. He was raised a Southern Baptist. That means his baptism was a valid Christian baptism because it was a Trinitarian baptism. Mine in the Mormon Church, which came almost a year after you're supposed to be baptized, give you a little tidbit about my family, was not a Christian baptism because it wasn't Trinitarian. Because the Mormons don't believe in the Trinity. The two things that I want to, I can use this one and I'll leave that up for anybody who wants to still write it. Two sets of beliefs that make up Mormonism. One is they widen the gap to an existential gap between Jesus and the patristic church to 1820 when Joseph Smith had his first vision. That's what the claim is, first vision. That they widened this, and they're never very clear when the church went off the rails. But it's usually thought to be pretty early. Well, I won't do that. But it's an existential gap. Where Luther and Calvin thought that Augustine was the greatest previous Christian thinker. I mean, Calvin's Institutes, the number one source other than scriptures that he cites is Augustine. The Mormons would never do that. It's earlier than that. They're not clear. Neither is Luther, neither is Calvin, exactly when. But they widened this. There's an existential gap. This, for Mormons, is called the idea of the apostasy. They widened that gap to where it's not even recognizable. It needs to be restored, not renewed or reformed. You don't need a kind of reform that St. Francis was called to give. More concern for the poor when Christ appeared to him over the altar in the little church at Assisi. You don't need a new language to renew timeless truths, kind of like Vatican II proclaimed. Vatican II didn't make a break in the church. It made a kind of new language to express timeless truths. Or Paul VI made the absolutely right call in Humanae Vitae. But then Blessed John Paul II gave a much richer, deeper argument, renewed the argument in a much more positive way than had ever been done. Didn't change the fundamental principle, just renewed the argument for it. This is the Mormon idea. You need a restoration. But if there's no existential gap, then you've really got a problem. So they put an existential gap where there isn't one. And then they put no gap where there is. God, persons, no gap. Joseph Smith, in the last year of his life, last few months of his life, gave 2 talks, called sermons, if you will. And one of them is see if I've got the exact. One of them has become, it isn't in Mormon canonical scripture, but it's as near as you can get, and it expresses the Mormon truth. A truth about Mormonism. Not that it's a true teaching, it's just truth about Mormonism. Joseph Smith said, quote, God himself was once as we are now and is an exalted man. God started out on a world like this one and then became God. Huh? You mean he didn't create everything creatable? No. He's an organizer. He's a manager. He's not a creator. He is an office like captain and not a nature. There could be millions, millions, millions of human beings who have become God through a developmental process. There's no existential gap. So there's no need for an incarnation in the way traditional Christianity or Christianity holds. Since you don't need an incarnation, you don't need a trinity. Mormonism is not a monotheism, even a Trinitarian monotheism such as we proudly proclaim. It is a polytheism. That's what it is. And when I ask students, and last semester I taught philosophy of religion. I teach it every other year. I have a strong colleague in the parish and in my department. 40% of our 5 philosophers at Utah State University are really strong Catholics, and both of us are converts. He and his wife tried to make Anglicanism work. It didn't. Maybe the Anglicanism of C.S. Lewis's day would have been okay, but Anglicanism is not the C.S. Lewis Anglicanism. I wonder, Tolkien, who was a devout Catholic, always tried to get his colleague C.S. Lewis to convert to Roman Catholicism. I wonder if now, the way Anglicanism has gone, he might have succeeded. Lewis would have said, this is wrong. Well, it is. So's Mormonism. But Mormons, the Mormon view of creation, if you will, reminds me of a funny story. The scientist comes to God and says, God, we've got it all figured out. We know how to make life. And God says, that's interesting. Show me how. And the scientist says, well, you take some dirt. And God says, wait a minute. Get your own dirt. But last semester in philosophy of religion, I was talking to students, and they wanted to talk. So a lot of them are Mormons. And this one girl expressed a view that was widespread among the Mormons. She said, yeah, I'm a polytheist, but I want to be a monotheist. I want all the advantages of monotheism. I want to believe that God, I want to believe in the God of Boethius. Well, I'm sorry. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You've either got to have the God of Boethius or this polytheism that you want to be attached to. A couple of years ago, when I was just becoming a Catholic, it was just starting in RCIA, I was teaching philosophy of religion, and then every other year my colleague takes it, and then I get to do a senior seminar that I've been doing called Philosophical Theology. In the fall of 2010, I decided we'd read one masterpiece. So I had 10 students, and we studied Augustine's De Trinitate, which is Christianity and Neoplatonism on every page. It really is. So they had to learn Neoplatonism like a graduate student would, because that's what Augustine uses. But a couple of years ago, after a discussion like this, I asked them, why do you worship the captain and not the top general? Because there's only one top general of all the military. And I was explaining this. And after class, this young woman engaged me in a longer conversation. I said, well, here's the problem with that. Why not worship the top and not the, you're worshiping the angels and not God. And I explained it, and she said, well, if that's the price, then and this is an exact quote, then I don't believe in a top God. What? You don't believe in a top God? She didn't. And that was Mormonism. It's an office and not a nature. There's no gap here. So there's no need for a Trinity, no need for an incarnation, no need for most of what historic Christianity teaches. Now, the Mormons say historic Christianity was so corrupted that we need something additional to the Bible. We need the Book of Mormon, which Joseph Smith supposedly got from an angel, and tells a story about people in the ancient New World who fled from Jerusalem about 600 and came to this continent somewhere in Central or South America and set up a civilization. Well, the Mormons keep revising where that was and how that happened. Because there's no evidence to support it. And in fact, the genetic evidence about the origins of people in the New World absolutely contradict that story. And I have a friend who teaches at Roanoke College who's having a discussion, and they know each other really well, with a Mormon person I know, a scholar at BYU, he's a popularizer at BYU, and the students asked him, this was last fall during the Romney campaign, the students asked him, what about the evidence? And he said, doesn't matter. It's a matter of faith. Well, there are certain things that are matters of faith. But then there are certain things where the evidence contradicts it. You have evidence anyway. And you disagree with it. Or you say, doesn't matter, it's a matter of faith. So, if there's no gap here, and there's a gap there, that's just backwards. And the Mormons have what they call the Joseph Smith inspired version of the Bible. That is where Joseph Smith took the King James Bible and made additions or detractions or deletions from it. And they have that now. It's the official Mormon Bible, and those things are in the footnotes. But they're important for a whole lot of reasons. But I'll give you one. Yesterday, I did the program over in Zanesville. And they have people, I think it's broadcast on radio and then it's going to be broadcast on TV, Journey Home. And they got some emails coming in, and Marcus read them. One of them was to me, how do we, it wasn't really confront, but how do we deal with Mormon missionaries when they come to our door? What can we say to them that might be helpful to them? And so I said, well, there are two things you can challenge them about. One is the commission, or the commission to Peter in Matthew. You are Peter, and upon you I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. So ask them, did Jesus get that right or wrong? If he got that right, then you should be Catholic. If he got that wrong, you shouldn't want to have anything to do with any organization he founded. Should you? You should either be Catholic or shouldn't be any organization he founded. And then I said the second one is just point out to them, in your Bible, the King James Bible, which is, of course, a bad edition. Bad is too strong a word. It's an imperfect edition of the Bible. Particularly for it doesn't have, the interesting thing is that Luther thought that Augustine and the patristic church was right, mostly. But then he didn't use the Old Testament that they used, the Septuagint. He thought they were great. And then the church went off the rails somewhere in the Middle Ages. But he didn't use the Bible they use. He didn't include the Septuagint, the material that we have in our Bible, in his Bible, which became the basis for the Old Testament in the King James Bible. The New Testament in the King James Bible came from Erasmus's 1516 first printing of the Greek New Testament. Now, Erasmus was a wonderful scholar. He did a magnificent service to getting the New Testament out. But he used manuscripts that were 800 or 900 years later than the earliest manuscripts we now have, but they weren't available in Erasmus's time. Also, he did a really interesting translating job, or editing the text job. He had the Greek text, and he had various copies of the Greek text, and there was a gap in here. So he said, I have the Vulgate. If the Latin says this, then the Greek must have said this, and he put it back in the gap he had. Didn't think that that was the way you were supposed to do things. But they have this Joseph Smith inspired version in footnotes, but it's not inspired. Well, it may be actually inspired by forces of darkness.